Just curious to ask, I guess, how is it revisiting this film years later?
Yeah, this is probably my most feel good movie. Um, I shot this film, I think less than a year after I made Senorita, my debut feature. And I think after making Senorita, I was like, oh my God, what kind of movie have I made? I was born and raised Catholic, you know? And so uh, I think I was trying to, in a way, do the complete opposite and make something like Apparition that felt, because Senorita, for a first feature, I have to say, it was also ambitious and crazy and pretty out there. So I wanted to do something more contained. For my second feature, I remember, the five obstructions, the Lars von Trier, and I wanted to set myself some kind of particular limitation to work with and see what kind of ideas I come up with for the film. And I said to myself, I just want to set this in one location because in Senorita, I was like, we were all over the place. Sometimes we were doing 2, 3 locations in one day. So I was like, I want to just have it all take place in a singular location and see what kind of story I can come up with. And so I mentioned during the introduction that Raise the Red Lantern by Tang Yimou was an inspiration. And for those who are not familiar with that film, it stars Gong Li, and it takes place in the 18th century in this one compound owned by this Chinese master with multiple wives, and it becomes sort of the power play between these different women. And I wanted to, with that inspiration in mind, and also I had been watching a lot of Bergman at that time, films like Cloud Cries and Whispers. And so I wanted to make a film that was primarily about women, the relationship between these women, and having been very Catholic when I was in grade school from second to the 5th grade. I was an altar boy. I was attending mass every morning, Monday to Friday, for 4 years in grade school, and so the influence of Catholicism was very much deeply entrenched in me. That influence, I think, evolved into a kind of ambivalence about, how the disparity and the dissonance between what was being taught, what the doctrine says, and how the religious and sometimes the priests behave themselves. And but one particular, I think, memory that also stood out to me that became essentially the seed of the idea behind Apparition was when I was a child in the late 80s. There was a people power revolution, which was at that time deemed to be the most prominent, high-profile, non-violent revolution staged by a country that resulted in the ouster of a dictator. And it was 3 days in major cities, and particularly Manila, of a lot of Filipinos just taking to the streets and marching in protests silently. And one segment that was particularly visible and active during those 3 days of protests were nuns. Some of the most well-known photographs of that episode in Philippine history are nuns, arm in arm in the streets, nuns offering soldiers, flowers. Yes, these are soldiers standing in military tanks, and one nun was offering a flower to this soldier, and that made me think of the preconceived notions that we have about religious women in the Philippines, about how they're supposed to be very docile and subservient and just towing the line and following everything that was being taught. The church, Roman Catholic Church, is a patriarchal institution, and I had to reconcile that image, the preconceived notion that I have of the nuns, and these photos of these nuns who are very politicized and politically enlightened, for them to take this action. And so the narrative of Apparition is essentially a fictionalization of how I imagined nuns became politically awakened during martial law, or the years before martial law, leading up to the People Power Revolution in the late 80s.
Do you recall any research process? For example, did you have an opportunity to talk to some of these nuns?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when I was my hometown Cebu, we lived maybe half an hour away from some Carmelite nuns, and also another monastery where they're really a cloister, and you can't really, socialize with and fraternize openly with these nuns. You have to have the conversation through some kind of, tiny window where you have when you get to talk to them. And I wanted to get a sense of their daily lives, their rituals, what time they woke up in the morning, what the tasks that they did, and what time they went to bed at night, how many times they prayed during the day. And that interview that I had was where I based a lot of, the depiction of how these nuns in the film went about, in their day.
And going back to what you were saying at the beginning about sort of the stylistic limitations being intriguing to you, maintaining the singular location, were there any other aspects of the film that were sort of born out of, sorry, let me take a step back. So this is one of your only films in which you don't star in the film.
Yes.
So to what extent did that change or influence how you approached directing this film?
Yeah, I certainly, having made my first feature and just looking at it, I really thought to myself, and I said this last night as well, like, wow, this seems like, a stage play. Well, like, it's so verbose, there's so much dialogue, and some of them were really quite expository. And I was like, it's my first feature. I'll give myself a break. But what I would want to address in this follow-up is I wanted to feel genuinely more cinematographic, and not just, beautiful images, but cinematography that did dramatic work. And I also wanted to have a lot less, or considerably less, dialogue than in Senorita, and setting the film in a monastery, and cloistered nuns, where they went about their days more quietly, that made a lot of sense as well. So I think this is really the first film where I was interrogating my relationship with dialogue and with words, and that I feel like with Senorita, perhaps the dialogue was more straightforward in its intent. People say things that they mean, or people articulate what they're actually thinking or feeling. But whereas this is the first of my films where characters hide behind their words, I feel, and they obfuscate what they truly mean with the words that they use. And not only, and besides that, there are like, pauses and silences that are very charged and emotionally loaded and pregnant with meaning. And that's where I think the film draws a lot of its tension as well.
If I understand correctly, the performers in the film, they're quite well-known television actors, soap opera actors in the Philippines. Can you talk a little bit more about that, especially in this context you're speaking about with the focus on dialogue and silence?
Yeah, they are, especially Sister Remy and Sister Lourdes, the younger nuns in the film are, and also, of course, the veteran actresses that were there, extraordinary actresses. I think they have starred in quite a number of great films, but for a lot of actors in the Philippines, the bread and butter are like soap operas and telenovelas. But like, for instance, the two younger nuns, I would consider them the Michelle Williams and Charlize Theron of Philippine cinema. That scene, that wordless scene where there's a confrontation between them after that traumatic incident. We shot that at 2:30 in the morning after maybe shooting for already like 12, 13 hours that day. And so right before we shot that scene, Sister Lourdes was literally taking a nap. She was taking a nap for 2 hours, and then half an hour before we were going to shoot it, I woke her up and said, "We're ready for that scene that I talked to you about." And so she and Maylene, Sister Remy, just talked about it for like 15 minutes, and I was telling the crew, okay, it's 2:30 in the morning. We have to get this right in one take so that everyone can go home. And so when the cameras rolled, this is really the one and only take that we have, of that scene. And so when I said cut, everyone in the crew just, erupted in spontaneous applause. That's how extraordinary and committed these actors, everyone on that set was. I said last night that I didn't go to film school, but I think I had a knack for articulating my vision as a filmmaker to the people that I worked with. And so I made sure that I worked with professionals that were operating at the highest level of their craft, at a technical level. And the technical achievement in Apparition is very much a testament of the craftspeople and the actors that were part of it.
Absolutely. I have one more question. I think we can turn it to the audience. This is just me thinking and my own cinephilia, and noticing that you're playing Le Samurai over the weekend, because this was an influence on your new film Moonglow. But I was struck when I was watching this film, struck by a comparison to a different Melville film. I was thinking about Army of Shadows, in the sense of kind of feeling like when I watched that movie, Army of Shadows, which I think honestly probably is one of the best films I've ever seen. It makes me think like, wow, I'm not doing enough. Like, it's this kind of call to action in a way. Like, these guys, they risk their lives to be in the French Resistance. That's what the film is about. You watch it and you're just like, what am I doing? Like, if there was like, I'm not doing anything against the rise of fascism. I'm not doing enough. Like, that's what that movie makes me think about. And so, I see that in this film, that we're observing this kind of call to action. And I wonder, too, how personal it is for you, because I think there is that element, that political element in all of your films. So I guess the question in this is, to what extent do you feel that your cinema and cinema in general is a kind of activism or call to action?
Yeah, I think, anyway, it never starts. I don't go about, with this design to make a consciously or deliberately, political film, or at least politically trenchant and didactic one, where there's a very precisely, you know, thought out, call to action, but somehow it ends up being that way. What I do try to do is portray, in my film so far at least, women, female characters who are forced to or find themselves making important and private and personal decisions in a milieu that's very clearly defined, socially, politically, economically, and how these broader social political forces inevitably impinge on and encroach on and influence the decisions of these women. And that's clearly very much true here as well. And I think thinking about it now, having just rewatched this film this evening and how it's perhaps subconsciously, inadvertently in dialogue with my new one, Moonglow, which is also set during this period of Philippine history during the martial law, and that they're ultimately dramas about the crisis of inaction, or in more perhaps Catholic terms, about the sin of omission, and how that is as damning as actually committing, atrocities as a dictator, as an authoritarian government. But it is, I think, the indifference and the apathy of the middle class, the citizenry that allows these things to happen without resisting them, or without at least the attempt to. You sound so serious.
No, that's great. I definitely want to pass it to the audience if we can. Yes. Actually, I don't know. Is there a mic? Yeah, perfect. The lights are very bright. I can't. It's actually hard to see.
I'm curious about the title, Aparisyon. Can you tell us more about the story behind the title?
Yeah, I mean, I think it meant it ironically because, in Catholic, iconography or tradition, apparition is a vision of the Virgin Mary, really. And it's an experience that's supposed to be sublime, transcendent spiritually. So here it means an experience that is also quite, deeply affecting for the nuns, especially, the Mother Superior and Sister Vera. But the nature of it is quite the opposite, because it is an act of violence, particularly violence against one of their own. So that's why I chose the title. It's because it meant essentially, the opposite of it.
Question. You, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this. You mentioned some of the research. Did any of the nuns or folks in the church that you talked to, did they watch the movie? Did they have any feedback on it? I'm just curious.
I have no idea, to be honest. But it was actually when we were looking for monasteries to shoot in, or convents to shoot in, that we were having trouble, because we can't really, we didn't want to lie to them about the premise of the film. So we ended up shooting this at a seminary with Catholic, religious Man Brothers, and I think shortly after we made this film, there were a few other Filipino films that were shot there, notably a horror movie. But yeah, so I have no idea whether the nuns that I interviewed actually saw the film. But for a few years after this came out, this became a film that would be shown during Holy Week in the Philippines.
That makes sense. Thank you. And if I can, just because your answer related to it was you're not at a monastery, you're at a seminary. Were you sequestered during it? I mean, you're obviously naturally a very sensuous filmmaker, and you're very gifted at that, at bringing the audience into the scenes that they're in. It felt very real, like being there in that feeling came across for sure. Did it feel like that for you making the film?
Yeah, we made the film actually over the course of a month, but we only had 8 shooting days. We shot this over 8 days. We would shoot this, you know, 2 days a week because the rest of the time, the actresses were doing soap operas. So sometimes they would even come straight from the set, of that TV show, straight to our shoot. So we weren't sequestered in one location, but I'm glad that you felt that it felt immersive, that way. I really wanted it to feel certainly more quite intimate. Um,
And
Thank you, Blake.
In the middle, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if you could speak to your writing process and how that kind of changed over time too, from like your first film, Senorita, to this film.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I shot this film literally less than a year after I shot my first feature. And it was a submission to, at that time, I think the most high profile independent film festival in the Philippines called Cinemalaya, and they had a deadline. And so having the deadline helped me finish the script, on time. And I also decided to, at the suggestion of the festival, work with a more experienced screenwriter. So yeah, I think we finished the script in 2 months, 2.5 months, including the tweaks that we made. So essentially, we wrote the film around September to late November, early December, and then we were shooting the film by April, like late March through April, and we premiered the film there in August. So it was a very, quick turnaround for the film. With Lingua Franca, the process of writing that took quite a bit longer because right after this film came out, I came back to the U.S. Here in New York, and that's when I transitioned. And so I just wanted to lay low, and maybe 2 years after I transitioned, that's when I started writing Lingua Franca. And writing the script for that took me almost 3 years. Really, about a year and a half into writing it was when Trump got elected for the first time. So weird to say that, for the first time he got elected. And then, just like a lot of minorities at that time, I think, it was quite an existential, despair about, what's gonna happen. And I'd actually gotten my green card, fortunately, like literally 2 weeks before I got elected. But, I wasn't sure how to, continue to go on. And when I eventually dusted off the script and continued writing lingua franca, I wanted to channel and distill what I was feeling at that time, that feeling of anxiety and uncertainty and some kind of paranoia, and that became the predominant mood and feeling of lingua franca, and that's also when it evolved into its final premise, which is the romance between an undocumented Filipina immigrant and the Russian Jewish slaughterhouse worker. So it depends on the film that I'm making, and if there's a deadline for a festival.
So much. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there another question? Yeah, just very briefly, I guess, for the...
We have
for
a
Moon-
question here, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Thank you so much for being here. I just had a question about the transition between the soap opera acting and the acting in this film, and if there's any way that you directed that shifted the acting style, because I was very interested in the emotion and the sort of bodily emotion that was really prominent here, especially in the silences, as you talked about. And the scene that you filmed at 3 a.m., which was really amazing, that wordless scene that is so full dramatically. But also this kind of, like so many shots of people's faces and bodies emoting that almost run together, because almost in the absence of a lot of biography also, right? We're sort of just in what each person is feeling and the ways that they're feeling together. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about the role of emotion and the acting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I had one consistent performance note to the actors in the film, and it's really just to dial it down, like turn it down a notch, more. It was kind of that kind of calibration of the performance, to take it from something that felt more explosive and bombastic into something that felt more introspective, and turned inward, so that the rare moments where there's kind of the dam breaking, emotionally, it meant a lot more. And I really, besides like the sound design and the cinematography, I think also performance can really, and how much you can see the characters, as the people in the film, after given the context of what happens to them, how much feeling they're withholding and denying themselves from feeling is actually what affects the audience more. And so that was my approach, really, to the feeling, and the demonstration and the expression of feeling in the film, and that whatever your character is feeling, try to hide behind that. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Isabel, for being here.
Thank you so much, Chris, and